What's up, y'all, and welcome back to another episode of In the Wild. I'm Rayshawn, and today we are talking about something really cool, artificial intelligence. Have you used AI at all recently? A little bit? Because with all of the technological advances, I feel like AI is just continue to be baked into it in some form or fashion. Like if you have an iPhone, there's Apple Intelligence, there's Chat GPT, there's Grammarly, and just all the other generative AI that just is slowly becoming just a household thing. And today we're going to talk about it with some very cool folks. So first up, we have Dr. Craig Albert, who is a professor of political science, but he's also the graduate director for a new PhD program, which he's going to tell you more about that. And we have Dr. Candis Bond, who is a friend of the show. So she's been here before a couple times, but now we're talking to her, she's in a new role. She is now the interim chair for the Department of English and World Languages, which is exciting. So shout out to her. And I'm excited to talk about all things AI with these guys and kind of just seeing the cool things, but also some of the things we should consider, because with it being new and unregulated, there's just so much to be explored and to, I guess, be concerned about as well. So I hope you're ready for this episode, because here we go. All right, well, welcome Dr. Bond back on the podcast, and welcome Dr. Albert. You're joining us virtually. Excited to have you. Welcome to In the Wild, first-time guest. Happy to have you both. And I guess just diving right in, because we're talking about AI, which is not only very trendy, but also just very intriguing right now, because there's so many different ways to use it. But before we get into that, can you both tell us a little bit about your roles here at the university, and I guess just what is something just really exciting about what that you get to do to serve our students?
Sure, I can start. So my name is Candis Bond, and I am currently the interim chair of the Department of English and World Languages. I've been at AU for about 8 years, so many of you may know me as the former director of the Center for Writing Excellence. But my favorite thing that I get to do at AU is just talk with students about their goals and their dreams and see what I can do to help them accomplish whatever it is that they're trying to do. Like, there's always a way. So I like being creative and kind of thinking outside the box with them and seeing how can we make this work, for you, so that you can graduate and go off to do whatever it is you want to do.
I love that.
I'm Craig Albert. I'm professor of political science, and I'm the graduate director of two programs, the Masters of Intelligence and Security Studies and the PhD, the newly approved PhD in Intelligence, Defense, and Cybersecurity Policy. The thing I like the most is helping our students that want a career in the federal government or want a career in the agencies or in the military, enhance their education and really get a superb, better than Ivy League education at Augusta University. Having small class sizes, really hands-on experiential learning, even in the online environment. And we have so many faculty that love to work the space to make it an inclusive, really dynamic classroom. So that's what I love the most about my job.
And I'll start with you, Dr. Albert, to get us started with our conversation about AI. Just with the master's and now the newly PhD program, like, what are some of the trends and how does AI kind of play into the program of what you're, I guess, seeing in terms of just like national and global security? Because there's a lot.
Sure. So there's tons. So we could have 1,000 hours on this, so I'm going to be quiet when I'm talking too much. But AI is right now a force multiplier for national security. And so what that means is it enhances the mission sets we already have out there. So every type of warfare or every what we call battlefield or battle space domain that we have, so think land, air, sea, space, cyber, AI adds to the force projection of power that we have in those spaces. So if you think about warfare as moving people into combat and the different functions and tools that allow that or make it more efficient, or for the U.S. to have the advantage in these instances, AI enhances that and adds something to it in each of those different domains that other nation-state actors don't necessarily have. And so it's really changing the game, especially for cyber operations, offensive and defensive, because now you can code with AI and it helps you defend better and attack better. You can actually program it to search for vulnerabilities and adversarial networks and go after them. And then especially, and right now this is important for election interference, information warfare, which we define as interference into the decision-making processes of individuals or groups. This is what Russia, China, and Iran is trying to do to the United States, and they use AI to create their messages. We call it propaganda for shorthand, and then they use AI to spread it simultaneously through different social media network channels and pages. So when you think of AI, it's really just this beautifully sophisticated force multiplier, especially in the information and cyberspace domain, that can really amplify the game. So it really increases the power projection of the United States' force, but also serves as a force equalizer because some lesser powered nations are using AI to kind of beef up their security against the United States. And so what you could see in the next 5 to 10 years is lesser power states really competing with the United States because they buy the AI off of third-party vendors. They don't make it themselves. They just buy it, and then they have the same tools or older tools that the U.S. has, but they're capable of competing with the U.S. in some of these areas. And so that's a game changer.
What would you say are some of just like the ethical considerations of using AI in those areas?
The biggest ethical consideration right now is when we talk about robot wars. So this is something that most people laugh at. I remember a year ago reviewing a paper on robot wars, and I was like, this is science fiction, it's hilarious. And now I'm like, oh my gosh, this is for real. So now we have, and this has already been tested and tried in Ukraine, it's already been tested and tried in the Gaza conflict, but you have the deployment of semi-autonomous vehicles, either land, sea, or air, that you can pre-program to target a particular person. Once you set it off, you can't necessarily take it down. So you can put facial recognition features in it, say, go get this person. It goes, gets it. It goes and finds that person and eliminates that person. I'm sorry for using this language, but that's the nature of security. Obviously, that has ethical concerns because it's not 100% guaranteed, right? So you can't perfectly map out the facial features, but you can set the target based on that. And then if you have a human out of the loop, meaning that the human is no longer in control of the system, once you set its target, it's gone. So it could hurt people that aren't necessarily should be hurt, right? They're not combatants, they're citizens, civilians in the area. And then you have the overall consideration, should you be using AI in machines to kill people? Because the idea is that it's a slippery slope. If you have AI, like the US has AI in robots, it's likely to increase the chance that the United States goes to combat against other countries that don't have AI, because we don't have to worry about soldiers or Marines getting killed, right? So actually, if you have the material to go to war and your citizens won't be harmed by it, you're more likely to go to war. So the idea is that AI might actually trigger more war just because people won't be fighting these wars, at least on one side of things. And that can get, if it's robots against robots, that's one ethical decision, right? Like, should you be wasting this space? What kind of technology is there? How is it happening? What kind of civilian infrastructure damage are you doing? But that's kind of the lesser problem than if you have robots against another country's people, right? So, and unfortunately with war, if you have the advantage, you use that advantage. And so if the United States chooses to use its autonomous vehicles or semi-autonomous vehicles with AI that makes them work against a population that doesn't have this, and you're talking about robots against civilians, and now you're talking about, this is really a moral, ethical decision. Like, should you be doing this? And it always reminds me of that quote, famous from Jurassic Park, right? Just because we have the capability to do this doesn't necessarily mean we ought to do this. And I think that's so true with AI. There needs to be much more regulation in warfare and security concerning this, especially against lesser developed countries and lesser developed militaries.
And so in your master's and PhD program, how do you teach your students this? What does that look like?
Yeah, it's just like this. We have conversations. So we'll read case studies of how drones, for instance, are used in Gaza, or how drones are used in Ukraine. And actually, in Ukraine, Russia deployed a kind of like battalion of infantry vehicles, semi-autonomous infantry vehicles. And so they sent, let's say, 100 AI robots into the war against Ukrainian soldiers, which was the first, that size battlefield operation, robots against people. And so using that case in the class, we talk about, hey, how should this have worked? Should Russia have won this battle? They didn't, because Ukraine stopped it using, won't go too much into details, but electronic warfare. They were able to wipe out the robots before they got to the center of conflict, which was interesting. So we talk about how you defend against AI. Should they have done this? What would have happened? What can the U.S. learn from this? Because the U.S. has currently the same types of machines for ocean deployment, for space deployment, for land deployment. What we learned in Ukraine is that there are very easy ways to stop that. And so we spent billions of dollars on these machines, and they haven't been tested in warfare. And so now we see that they can be stopped just by signals. So now what is the U.S. going to do with this $1 billion of equipment? How do we upgrade them and make sure that they can't be shut down just by pushing a button? So we use all these types of case studies to talk about the different various scenarios, including ethics, morals, great power competition, power advantage, vulnerabilities, and really teach the know-how, the policy about it, and the strategy of using AI in warfare.
That's very interesting. But switching gears a little bit to you, Dr. Bond, as former director of the Center for Writing Excellence, how is AI, I guess, incorporated in how you interact with your students?
Yeah, that's a great question. So over the past 2 years almost, I guess, the Center for Writing Excellence has done a lot of work to understand AI in education, and especially in writing and communication. I remember being at a conference 2 falls ago and going to a panel where they were talking about Quillbot, which is a very primitive version of Gen AI. And I came back and talked to my then department chair, Dr. Williams, about it, and we kind of thought, this is crazy, what is this even? And then just a couple months later, ChatGPT, came on the scene, and my inbox was just filled with emails from faculty who were concerned, that every student was going to use it, that it was going to completely disrupt relationships between, them and their students, or how can we trust students? How can students trust us if these technologies are out there? So in the Center for Writing Excellence, we actually integrated Gen AI into our tutor training. So our tutors have an understanding of what it is, kind of similar to Dr. Albert. We talk through a lot of case studies with them in their training course in terms of, if a student is using it in this way, how might you have a conversation with them? What are the ethical dimensions of this kind of use versus this other kind of use? In what context might it be okay or encouraged to use something like ChatGPT, and in what context is it maybe not okay? So we then, this was really Dr. Garner, who's the current interim director. He then came up with kind of an in-house policy that our tutors abide by for how they handle, cases of Gen AI use in the center. And really what it comes down to is we want to promote any kind of technology, whether it's Gen AI or something else. We want to promote it if it's going to facilitate learning and if it's going to help people improve their skills. But we want to discourage its use if it's going to inhibit learning or keep students or anyone, from learning things that we hope they are here to learn in college. So the other thing that, is foundational is they need to go by the rules. And at AU, our academic honesty policy says that it's up to the faculty member to decide whether Gen AI is allowed in the classroom or not, and to what extent. So, we were just really pushing in every writing consultation that you have, make sure that students are consulting the syllabus, make sure that then they're looking at the policy, and don't do anything until, you're clear on what's allowed and what's not allowed. And if you're not sure, then you need to reach out to the faculty member and ask. And actually what was really cool about that is we teach our tutors to tell students these things anyway about anything they're learning, like to contact your professor if you're unclear, to look at prompts and the syllabus. But I think that this has provided a great opportunity for us to revisit some of those kind of foundational skills of being in college. And I'm a first-gen student. Dr. Albert, you might be too, I think. And there's this whole idea about demystifying the hidden curriculum of college. And I think Gen AI has allowed us to do that in the Writing Center in really neat ways, where we can have conversations with students we otherwise might not have had about, how do you email a faculty member? How do you have difficult conversations when you're thinking about using technology, but you're not sure if they're going to be okay with it or not? Because I think a lot of students are intimidated by faculty, especially newer students who maybe it's their first year in their undergrad or grad program. And so they're afraid to ask. But we've with Gen AI, it's kind of just opened the door. It's like you have to ask. So now we're kind of breaking down some of those challenges and barriers overall. And now that I'm interim chair of English and World Languages, so my background's also in teaching writing. We have many subdisciplines in English. So I'm associate professor of English, and my area is rhetoric and composition. So teaching writing is kind of what I do in the classroom too. But now I get to interact with all of our faculty who are teaching composition and all kinds of writing courses, whether it's creative or professional writing or even the world languages. And it's been really interesting to see how Gen AI pops up in different ways in those classes. But when it comes down to it, again, I think the theme I'm seeing across all of the disciplines is that we really need to make sure our students are learning. And so, Gen AI is a tool. It's not inherently moral or immoral in itself, but how you use it can have ethical implications and, consequences, like serious consequences for yourself as a lifelong learner and just how you engage with the world. So we want to make sure that students are using it in ways that are setting them up for long-term learning and success, and not using it as a crutch or using it to take the place of, what they would have been doing before in college to build skills.
Yeah, about, I want to say a year ago now, I've started just dipping my foot into using AI for just kind of saving those things that I have in writer's block. I don't have the time to be as creative as I need, so I need someone to help me name this podcast episode, or I need someone to help me phrase the email the way that I want it phrased. And so I want to say in the past year or so, I now use ChatGPT for the most random things, even outside of work, whether it's just asking, why is the sky blue? Or if it's something like, okay, my car is making a weird noise. Can you check, for this Nissan, what it might be? And I guess I'm kind of curious to hear from both of you guys. Have you encountered students who are also coming to you saying, yeah, I'm really still curious about how I can use this, and I've talked to my professor and they don't know still? I guess, what does those conversations look like for you guys when they go to their faculty member and the faculty member is like, I'm still figuring out, I'm right there with you?
Yeah, well, I could start that one off if that's okay, Dr. Albert. I think that one of the best ways, and the easiest ways to interact with Gen AI is just as a brainstorming tool. So it's kind of like what you were mentioning, I just need ideas. And for faculty who haven't tried it out yet, I would encourage them to try it and just, ask it questions and see what it tells you. I think that's a really easy way to get a feel for the technology. Give me some names for songs, about love, whatever the topic is, and just see what it comes up with. It is really important to know that it hallucinates and is only as good as, it's only as good as what's been put into the large language model or whatever it is. So you always have to double check whatever it is that it tells you. But I think that's what I've been telling students in that situation. Let's use it as a form of inquiry, kind of if you used to go onto the internet and just do a basic search to get an idea of what people are saying, you could maybe use it in a similar way to that. You could also put in some ideas you're having and just ask it to build on that and see where it goes. One thing I will tell faculty who are experimenting is to be cautious about what you're asking your students to put into any kind of Gen AI, because we're still really not clear on ownership. And so I'm always really cautious. I don't use things like Turnitin for that reason too, because whatever my students are putting in, I don't want them to think that no one else is going to see it or that it's not going to pop up, later in the model. So I do tend to just be cautious with that, and I wouldn't necessarily require students to put things in because that is their property, their writing or their ideas is theirs, and I want to make sure they understand that they're putting it out somewhere else, that maybe it won't be theirs anymore. But yeah, I think that just brainstorming is a really good starting point.
Yeah, I like to use this in my intelligence classes, especially intelligence analysis. There are different ways, or what we call structured analytic techniques. So it's different ways that you take information and turn it into an intelligence product. Intelligence meaning as in intelligence collection data points for warfare. So there's about 70 different methods you can do. So if I take a case study and give it to students and I say, now, which method would you use, and then do the method to explain this and provide the product back to me, I allow them to use Gen AI to throw the details of the case in there and say, what structured analytic technique is best in this situation. Or even I'll let them say, why do I do that? Because CIA does that, right? If you're at CIA and you're investigating the possibility of an invasion of somebody and you're throwing in the data amongst your intelligence software, they do the same thing with ChatGPT. They'll throw it in there and say, what technique is best in this situation? They even carry around the manuals of the techniques, right? So it's okay to do that because in the field, you're actually doing the same thing. It's just supplying it to you. But then I'll tell them to write up their memo, write up how they did the technique by themselves. And I make sure and I say, you can't use generative AI to write this or to explain the memo that you're producing to me, but only to give you further clarifications on how to use the techniques, which techniques make the most sense in this situation. I ask them to try it themselves, which techniques make sense first, and then they can double check it or triple check it using ChatGPT or other various platforms, but never to just and then to never just assume that it's right, like Dr. Bond was saying, because it can throw out something completely wrong. It's not great at making policies based on what you input, for instance. So it looks at the cost-benefit analysis of something, and it generally says eliminate the enemy without taking into account that they're people. So it kind of loses that side of things. It looks at it very just black and white when it comes to threat and targeting vectors. So I always caution students when they input something to make sure that they double and triple check it. And then, I think that's good.
And I guess I'm just curious to hear from you guys of how do you feel when people are saying like, oh, AI is just going to replace all these jobs or all these people? Like, what are your thoughts when you hear that as users of AI?
I think in general, we have a publication, shameless promotion here, on the fourth industrial revolution, which is artificial intelligence, right? And we talk about how it affects the domestic factors. And one of the big points is that it is going to replace a ton of jobs. But with a growing economy and the way the world system works is that different types of jobs will be invented that we didn't know we needed to handle what happens with jobs that are lost from AI and what AI is likely to cause with more technology and more advances. So it's going to replace some jobs that we have now, but we're going to have unknown jobs that need to be created in the next decade because of AI, and then those jobs will replace and replenish what jobs were taken over by AI right now. And I don't think we're there yet, right? Like, we're getting to the point in warfare where we can send robots into combat, but they have to have a human in the loop, meaning a human has to be controlling, targeting it from the beginning point at least. And typically in the US, we control it at the end point. I'm sorry, a big thumbs down just happened on my screen. I don't know if y'all did that or if it just happened. I was like, what am I saying something silly? So some jobs will be abandoned because of AI, but new and different types of jobs will be created because of it that will, I think, in a capitalist economy anyway, smooth things out, much like the original Industrial Revolution did.
What about you, Dr. Bond?
I would agree. I mean, I think that some jobs will be replaced, but overall, I think that if anything, the AI revolution might reveal how human we are, and it might, I'm hoping it will maybe reawaken our valuation of human skills and soft skills and things like that as well. And so I teach technical writing and scientific writing in my classes a lot. And that was actually one of the jobs that I know people were afraid about early on is, like, we're not going to need technical writers or scientific writing, it could just do that for you. But what we're finding more and more is that it could be a good starting point, but it's never going to produce a perfect product. And it's also not original. So it's just rearranging things that already exist, but it doesn't have the human creativity or capability to do new things necessarily with information other than just rearrange. So I think I'm very hopeful and optimistic that AI will be, a positive tool if we can kind of harness the ethics of it to maybe make some things more efficient, to help us produce things more quickly, but I think that in the end, we still need humans kind of directing the ship, as Dr. Albert was implying too. We still need them behind the scenes. And also a lot of things that Gen AI or AI makes is just bad. Like it's not good. Like, it's like I said, I think that it can be good in the process, but it's not going to be responsible for the final product, or at least good final products in most cases.
Yeah, in the
if I can add on to that for a second, I think, the danger is that some people in some of the industries think that AI can replace the human element. I agree completely with Dr. Bond that it can't. And just an example, right, is when if you set AI to select targets for you by itself without any human intervention, you can just imagine how things can go wrong. And humans can't get the target vectors correct 100% of the time. So something made by humans is not going to get it correct 100% of the time, and it's probably going to get it less correct. And so if you think about warfare and you're trying to pick out a terrorist or an insurgent in a civilian population, you are always going to have a human supervise the AI technology behind that in order to reduce civilian casualties, mistaken casualties. But unfortunately, and especially politicians, there are some that think AI can completely replace the human analyst. And I think we're likely to see perhaps over-reliance on AI at first. And then, like Dr. Bond was saying, I think people will become more aware of the human element of society, and then it'll start to regress a little bit and bring more humans back into it because of the social or societal dimensions that are needed. The human factors that you can't take out of just daily interactions that some people think AI will replace. It just can't happen.
I like both of your perspectives on that, because I remember, I think it was a video on Instagram or maybe TikTok where someone was like, I don't want AI to be creative for me. I want AI to be able to wash my dishes and do my laundry. Like that's what I want it to work for me for. So, and I also hear people say things like, AI is not going to necessarily replace people, but just replace jobs where people don't want to learn how to use AI, if that makes sense. So yeah, I guess there's a lot to be seen there still. And I'm enjoying the conversation so far. And for those watching, stay tuned, because we'll be right back with these guys. All right, and we're back. So before the break, we were talking a little bit of how students could potentially use AI and how we kind of teach or whatever. But I'm kind of curious as if you had any interactions with faculty who wanted to incorporate AI in how they teach, or use it maybe, I don't know, behind the scenes for grading or coming up with lectures or activities. Like, have y'all encountered that at all?
I have actually. So there is an AI interest group here at Augusta University that has faculty from across the colleges, and grading with AI was something that came up at one of our meetings actually. And I think I'm pretty old school on this one. So I don't know, everybody can take this with a grain of salt, but I'm just really protective of the relationship I have with students through my feedback. And I admit, I'm somebody who's grading writing most of the time, so I'm not grading like exams or, multiple choice things. And maybe it's different in those situations, but I really picture giving feedback as having a conversation with students. And I am very conversational in my feedback. And I feel like it would be cheating us both, like if I were to use AI in that. So I personally haven't used it in that way. And I would just, I don't know, it just kind of makes like my heart die a little bit to think of that. But I know that some faculty do, and they're still kind of holding the reins of the grading process, and they're definitely going in and adding in their own layer. So I think that there are ethical ways you could do it. But, again, it's just that whole idea of making sure that you're not trusting the AI just to do your work for you, that it's promoting your critical thinking as a faculty member and enhancing your expertise and not replacing, what you offer as a faculty member. So maybe you use it to kind of streamline some basic comments that students are struggling with across the board, but then you go in and personalize those comments as you're, commenting on different assignments or something. And also just trends in higher education right now, it makes me nervous that the public might perceive faculty use of AI in that way negatively. I feel like we, especially for Dr. Albert and I, who are in a college of arts, humanities, and social sciences, which are disciplines that the public has kind of lost some trust in recent decades. And I worry that they might come to just value our jobs less, or value our disciplines less, or think that our disciplines or our expertise or our skills are replaceable in ways that they really aren't. So I'm a little skeptical of grading with AI. But I do know, like, in terms of creating materials for your class, like if you want to make a syllabi or an assignment prompt or a rubric, I have used it in those ways, and it's been really helpful, and it's sped things up quite a bit. But in those situations, again, like I would never trust it to make the final product. It's more of like a starting point in my process where I use it to generate some ideas, and then I go in with my expertise and make it what it needs to be to serve, the purposes of the course. But the CII here, Center for Instructional Innovation, does tons of workshops on ways that you can use AI to develop your course materials. And I personally haven't attended one yet, but I've heard they're really good. So that might be something people want to check out.
What about you, Dr. Albert? Do you have anything to add to that?
I'm just terrified that anybody would grade with AI like that. I don't know how that happens. And again, I don't give exams or tests or anything. Everything's just papers or practical assignments or something. So I grade on so many different levels. Like I'm looking for, what type of emotional state they're in when they're writing, for instance. Like can I see if they're struggling by just how they're writing or how they're putting prose together in a certain way? Do they really understand the nuances and the theoretical development of a paper that they're writing? Do they choose the right theory, for instance, when you're applying it to a case study of warfare? There's so many nuances in grading that type of writing to me that I just don't ever think AI will be able to do the job of grading that. And again, I agree with Dr. Bond. Like, I care for my students so much that, like, they put the work into writing something and doing the assignment. Like, I want to put in the work that grades it and shows them that I appreciate it. Even if they need improvement in a certain area, like, I want to be helpful and really get into the details of what they need improvement on, and be able to respond and give them the type of advice and feedback that they need to encourage them, especially when students sometimes need a lot of improvement in certain areas of writing or in certain areas of analysis, and then writing up the analysis. You have to know precisely what they said and how they said it to encourage them properly. You want to show them empathy and encouragement along the way. At least that's my teaching philosophy, is that, and I'm strict. I mean, I'm a pretty brutal professor in the classroom.
Oh, no.
But but I want to be empathetically brutal. So I'm going to make sure you follow the directions and that you're doing, I'm trying to direct community for a job in the intelligence agencies. Like, you need to be at the top of your game, but at the same time, I want to propel you empathetically and compassionately to help you get to the top of the game. And so I'm going to read every word you give, and we have video responses and discussions and video discussions in classes, and I'm going to read those and watch those and correspond with those myself. Like, I don't want AI anything to do with that. Like, I want to connect as much as possible with my students to make sure that they're in the right state of mind, first of all, but also to make sure that they're really connecting and digesting the information, because they're the leaders of tomorrow in the public sector, but also in the military sector. And you want to make sure that they have the rationality and the emotive responses to be able to handle that job properly. I will say, because I tend to be a brutal grader in the classroom, I do use AI to really write my feedback often and kind of correct for my tone, because I know I don't mean to do it, but even when I'm just in conversation with people, my tone can appear as if like it's not good. So like, I try to, as much as I can for students, like rewrite my tone, rewrite my feedback using, just Grammarly, for instance. Right? Like, say, hey, can you make my tone sound sneer? Or it's actually set up already to do that for me. So it's like, hey, this is abrasive, like 100%. I'm like, oh, please help me fix this. And so I do things like that. And then the other way I'll use it is, I'm not the best at writing prompts for papers or for case studies. And so, even though I've been doing this for 20 years, I taught my first class where I was the professor of record in 2004. So I've been doing this a long time, but I still, it's an art and a science to write like a great prompt so that students know each directional step to take in an analysis. And so often students will flop on an assignment, and I find out that it's my fault for not writing the prompt properly. So now I like to run it through AI to say, hey, can this prompt be written with better language?
As y'all were talking, I'm like, as a new adjunct professor, I've had fun creating rubrics with AI because I'm like, I kind of know what I want it to look like, but at the same time, I'm not 100% sure. So having that as a resource to kind of set the foundation, like you mentioned before, but then still like use my expertise to fine tune it before I actually put it out. And yeah, I also would find it very difficult to try to grade podcasts using AI. So I don't see how that would help me with grading, but that I do think it's very interesting to see in the next couple of years how, I guess, in academia, AI will be used a little bit more. Hopefully, more, continue to stay ethical with that. Um, and I guess, how do you think other professionals can kind of balance that, like using AI ethically, but also being creative and innovative with what it allows you to do? Because it can save you a lot of time. It can give you ideas and perspectives that you may not have thought of before. Um, so yeah.
Well, oh, go ahead. Go ahead. No, you go ahead.
I'm always of the opinion of it's something to use as support, right? So I don't like the idea of someone relying on AI, period. I like it as a backup. So you come up with something, even if you're coming up with a new research project and you have writer's block or something, like don't run the AI, like work your way through it first, right? And get as much as you can, even if it's just a paragraph or a basic outline, and then throw it into Chat GPT and say, hey, like, is there something in this that I can make a research question out of, or something, or something like that. And I think for every discipline, for every profession, for the most part, I hope people don't rely on it as a first basis of operations, but as a second, as some way to check themselves or to enhance what they've already done, regardless of what the profession is. So I think when we start relying on it, that creates ethical problems, but also like a moral dilemma. Like, are you actually doing the job you're getting paid to do if you rely on AI as a first method rather than using it as a fallback option or an editor, for instance, or something like that? And even then, I don't trust AI, right? Grammarly is wrong a lot of times on just spell check and grammar check and technical writing, especially. So it's just a way to help fill in the gaps sometimes, but never rely on it exclusively. And we say this, even in the discipline for journals that allow you to use AI in certain ways. I use AI a lot to like format my references a particular way, but even then they get it wrong, right? And so it's like I'll use it to save me some time, but then I'll always go and double check it to make sure that it didn't hallucinate, it didn't throw in a false reference, which happens more than you think. Even when you give it your references, I have to realign it. So if you get rejected at a journal and you want to resubmit to another journal, often that journal will have a different reference style. And so I'll throw it into Chat GPT and say, hey, change it from Chicago to APA style. And then if I don't check it, I'll realize there are like 5 or 6 missing references, or it'll combine references in some cases and just mess it up completely. And so I always want to go through and double check it. So that type of mentality probably applies across disciplines.
Yeah, even for my perspective of just like writing in what we write in AP style here at the university, and so it's like I'll sometimes have asked it to like rewrite this in AP style, and it still messes up sometimes. So yeah, it's not a one all solution sort of thing. Uh, but speaking of the university, since we are a research institution, do you think AI can be used in just like helping researchers or those who are interested in doing research?
I think so, but again, this kind of comes back to just be careful what you're putting in. A lot of research has to be confidential until it's published or made accessible, especially grant-funded research or like government research. And I worry that maybe people will kind of, even by accident, put things into some of these platforms or programs and then it's just out there and they're not really aware of what they put out there or where it is. So I think that part's a little worrisome. But I do think that a lot of the things we've already mentioned, just in terms of how it can facilitate a writing process, how it can make parts of like formatting a little bit faster. Again, like you've got to double check it and make sure it's right. But it can, once you know how to do it yourself, it can then speed things up. And I think that's a theme that's running throughout this conversation too. It's like you kind of have to know the back end really well before you use it. And this is something I've taught students for years, like when they wanted to use citation generators, which have existed forever, I'd always tell them, well, if you're confident in the citation style, then yeah, I use the generator because then you can fix all of the mistakes it makes. But if you're not confident, I wouldn't recommend it because it'll slow you down. You'll spend more time having to learn things to fix it, or you'll just turn it in and, get a bad grade. And I feel like with AI, it's whether it's for research or other, personal or professional purposes, it's kind of a similar concept. Like you have to make sure that you know your own content or purposes or goals really, really well before you start to use any kind of tool so that you can make sure that the tool's not undermining, whatever your purpose is. And I really feel like AI will be so ubiquitous within a few years that the challenge won't be so much like how to learn how to use it or how to use it, but it'll be more like knowing the limitations and when to turn it off or when to, like I would hope that humanity wouldn't get boxed in or lose creative impulses because they are confined, by the scope of the technology, if that makes sense. Because like even now, Microsoft Word now has it like built in and turns it on automatically unless you turn it off. What's funny to me is a lot of faculty will say like, I don't let my students use AI, but then they're letting them use Grammarly Pro, which is generative. I'm like, well, so I mean, it's everywhere now. You can go into Canva or you go into social media and there's AI things like built in. So I think it will kind of be unavoidable in a lot of ways. And the challenge will be being aware enough, like self-aware enough that you know when to turn it off or when not to use it.
That makes sense.
I have mixed feelings on AI for research. If I'm investigating like a kind of new topic for myself, I kind of like AI to throw out like a mini literature review on an idea, just so I can get like a Wikipedia understanding of something to see if I want to go into it more deeply or something. So I'll often ask, hey, what are the top most cited articles for this area of study, and can you write a synopsis for me? And then if that's where it stops, and I don't use it to do my own research or to write my own stuff after that. I just try to see what's out there, just like I was going to, Wikipedia version of doing some research for me or giving me a synopsis of something, and then that helps me decide if I want to do the research myself. And so I think it's useful to do that if you don't rely on it to go further into your research, and especially if you don't rely on it to do any of your original writing or original research. Even a literature review, I don't like to use AI for. Like, I want to do all that stuff myself, but it is helpful to know if you're going into a new field who the top authors are, for instance, so I know where to start. So I kind of use it as a way of efficiently starting the research project, but that's where it ends. In the research project. And I'll also often use it to say, hey, what research questions haven't been figured out in this area or something. And sometimes you can get some innovative ideas by doing that. And so, that takes some creativity out of the researcher, but it helps with some of the unknown unknowns, which I think is great for the advancements of the science and the arts and research, is to say, hey, what hasn't been investigated in this area yet, and that, helps me with getting my research protocol started and to start a new research agendas, for instance. So I'm kind of in between, like, how it can be used, but there's a strict line, I think, and I think it when you see it. Like, if you're starting to use it as the writing process for you, I think that's wrong. If you're using it as a research precursor, then I think it's ethically and morally okay to do and can enhance the scientific community. And by scientific, I mean, the arts, humanities, and sciences all included.
Well, thanks to both of you guys for enlightening me a little bit about AI. Any final thoughts before I let you guys go about AI, ethical uses, scary facts, figures?
Rayshawn, do you have a PhD? Because I could teach you a whole lot about it if you enroll in our PhD in intelligence, defense, and cybersecurity policy.
I appreciate the offer. I think I'm done with school right now. Getting my master's was a journey, and I'm not sure about starting a PhD journey. But I'm pretty sure there are people out there who want to start a PhD journey, and I encourage you to. Highly recommend. What about you, Dr. Bond?
I think that there's just a lot still to learn. So I'm just excited to see like where this all goes in the next couple of years, and I think it will be hilarious for like my children or my child. I have a daughter. When she grows up, to look back at this time in our life, and it'll be like something she's always known, but for me it was like this crisis moment of newness, and it'll be really fun to have conversations with the next generation, in a few years, just to see like how our perspectives are different. So I really have no like great final thoughts other than I'm looking forward to where it takes us and seeing what happens.
Same here. And thanks again to both of you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. This was awesome.
All right, y'all. I hope you enjoyed that episode. I certainly did. I feel like I learned a lot about AI. I hope, seriously, if you're interested in studying the PhD program with Dr. Albert, go for it. I think I'm done with school at this point. I'm enjoying being adjunct in teaching, but I don't know if I'm going to be a student anytime soon. So if you're interested, definitely check out their website to learn more. And if you're just a student, feel free to check out the Center for Writing Excellence, because we have so many cool things happening over there. We're going to probably do a whole episode with them to talk about all the cool things over there. Check out the English and World Language Department. They are some awesome folks, some awesome programs and classes. And let us know what you guys think about AI and how you plan to use it, how you currently use it. I'm curious. So let us know on our social media. Like, subscribe, do all the things to let us know that you enjoyed this episode. And until then, I will see you guys in the next one. Go Jags!